guys, how are you? Everybody doing okay?
All good here.
Things
Awesome.
are good.
Definitely.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hey, to the First Pres audience, we're back for our second iteration of talking to our three residents. So again, my name is Matt Logan. It looks like Kevin Murray up here in the screen because I haven't changed it yet, but I'll do that right now. And we have Alexander Mooney, Keith Dove, and Nate Sell. So Nate, as most of you know, is in the second year of his residency, getting ready to wrap things up here in kind of unprecedented times. And then Alexander and Keith are coming up about 3/4 of the way through the first year of the residency. So part of these efforts are just to check in with the residents, get their thoughts, see what they're thinking about the church, where they are, kind of in the process of their own ministries, and also as it relates to the ministry here at First Presbyterian Church. So last week was a little more serious. This week we've thrown in some questions that hopefully will be will be fun. Be interesting to hear your guys' response to some of these questions. So obviously I sent these questions to the residents beforehand, so they can anticipate some of them, but I'm still interested to hear your thoughts. So let me rename myself Matt Logan, and then we will get started here. And again, guys, just feel like folks, feel like just jump in whenever you want. We don't have to go in order or anything. And so to the First Pres audience, we want to keep this as informal, but also hopefully it'll give you something to check out and understand that the folks at the church are still thinking about you and continue to do the work of the church even in these sort of unprecedented time of social distance and quarantine. All right, so let's get right into it. I know I said we were going to talk about questions that might be a little more humorous, but this first one is pretty serious. So, but after this, it'll be not better, but it'll be different. Okay, so the first question I have for you today is: has there ever been a time since you felt called into ordained ministry in the PCUSA? This doesn't necessarily have to be after you've been ordained, but just in a time in your life after you felt called where you doubted that call. And if you'd be willing to talk about that, if you have, and talk about how you thought about those things and how you kind of got through that. I think the folks would be interested to hear from you guys on that.
Should we do nose goes?
I can go first.
Okay, great.
Mainly because I remember my answer from last time, which the interview that no one will ever hear. So my answer is that I've never doubted my call into ordained ministry after finally accepting that I had a call to ordained ministry. All the doubt part for me was like in the discernment process of like, am I called or not? But once like I finally gave in, I haven't felt doubt with that. Like there was a lot of doubt in the process as I was part of a different tradition. Couldn't stand going to church on Sundays. Had never been on a mission trip, and I was like, if I can't stand going to church, I don't really have a church home right now. I've never been on a mission trip. How in the world am I like, why am I feeling this call to ministry? This is stupid, clearly not right. Like this is not the right thing to be happening right now. But after like wrestling with that for a year and a half, 2 years, there haven't been doubts after that, but there was like a huge, like angsty existential period of undergraduate Keith that was like, it was a lot going on.
Thank you. All right, who's next?
Go for it, Nate.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I guess kind of like Keith, for me, it was a long road to ordination. I think, when you go to seminary, I went to seminary thinking I was going to go on for a doctoral degree. I kind of got into it. I don't know. When I went to seminary, the call to seminary was like I needed to go but I wasn't sure why. And I like tried putting that off for a couple years after undergrad, and I kept trying to like not do that. And I got to the point where I was like, all right, I need to go see what this is all about, or I'm just going to think about it for the next 30 years and then go do it. So like, let's go check it out now. During seminary, ordination was this kind of open question for me for a long time. And eventually I can't really even, there wasn't any like lightning bolt moment for me. It just kind of became a part of me without me really understanding how or why. And I definitely have had seasons of like doubting that. And I think that I'm in good company though. Like I think about Jonah, and I think about like the prophets, right? And I think about Moses and Jeremiah, and I mean even like Peter and like the people who hung around Jesus, like they doubted that call too. So I've had seasons of that. Mostly it's not really seasons of doubt about God or Christ. Like I'm not doubting that. It's more about my effectiveness or my ability to lead, or I don't like being set apart, and so wading through those things. But more and more, like as time goes on, it's just felt more and more comfortable. And so yeah, I don't know if that fully answers it, but that's kind of where I've been. And yeah.
I can think of two major times. The first was my first year of seminary, where I was a church music major in undergrad and sort of felt like I'd mostly found my people, and they were all my friends. Like my friend group was all organists and church musicians, and thought, okay, these people mostly get me, but there's this one part, like I still felt called to ordained ministry. And I thought there's something about me that is a little bit different than the call that these other people feel. So I thought, okay, everything's going to fall into place when I go to a Presbyterian seminary. And I set myself up for failure there, because I got to seminary and thought, wow, if these are my people, then I don't want any part. That's overstating it a little bit. But it was just hard. I sort of felt like there were so many different people with so many different reasons that they felt called to ministry. And that was hard for me. I think I had assumed that lots of people's calls would feel like mine, which was a call primarily to the work of worship and the liturgy. And I didn't meet really anyone for at least my first year and a half of seminary who felt similarly about that. So that was hard. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm supposed to be a Lutheran. Maybe I'm not meant to be Presbyterian. I went to a Lutheran college, so that felt kind of natural. And eventually delved enough into theology and polity to realize, no, I'm not a Lutheran, I'm Presbyterian, and sort of worked through that. And then the other time was, I guess, around the similar time, really thinking about, okay, I love worship leadership. I love everything about what the church does on Sunday morning, but can I actually be a pastor? Had a lot of questions about, do I have what it takes to sort of relate to people and create meaningful relationships? And so I did my clinical pastoral education unit, chaplaincy unit, right after my first year of seminary, because I had so many questions about that. And I thought, if this doesn't go well, if this doesn't feel right in some big way, then I need to not do this ordination thing, which is putting way too much pressure on the CPE unit, because it's not, being a chaplain is not the same as being a pastor in so many ways. But enough of that showed me, okay, I can at least grow into what this means. So yeah, those are the two moments that I think about.
And adding a little bit more, does anybody want to talk about how sometimes I think we think about these things, calls, or what we want to do with our lives, as moments of like utter clarity, that it's like there's certainty and then there is uncertainty. And does anybody care to talk about how matters of doubt are actually entangled with matters of faith, and therefore, like, so it creates this understanding where you don't use certainty or knowledge, but you use trust, right? I know David Partington talks a lot about this, where like the understanding of faith always has to be about trust and not about like certainty or uncertainty. So does anybody care to talk about that, where It's not like, oh, I had this, theophany, and God like woke me up in the middle of the night and said like, you're going to be a pastor, but rather how in your call, there are all these sort of times where one of the conditions for trust and faith is doubt. Or do you disagree with that?
I think, one of the things that I really value about the Presbyterian call process, and something that's helped me a lot with my doubts, is that we don't do the individual call thing. We do community call. And so when I'm doubting my ability or fitness or call in general, I think about all the people who, like, in some ways pushed me into the call, right? Like I went kicking and screaming a little bit. And so I think those doubts, like, we don't do this in a vacuum. And I think part of the church is we shouldn't do anything in a vacuum for the most part. And that's not to undermine to say like God can't come to individuals and have important moments, but I think part of how we think about how God works is through the community of faith. So I think that speaks to that, at least for me, Matt.
So my home pastor, who helped me walk through all this stuff, was like a 20-year-old trying to figure out what in the world's happening to me. He said that God works in pinches and 2x4s. And like I know that like when I finally gave in to have like accepting of my call, like it felt like I was getting hit by a 2x4. And like there was like a moment of clarity of like, yeah, I'm called to something. And in that time of doubt and trying to figure stuff out, like I've never been so good at praying. And like never been so good at praying before or since, because like the doubt leads you to going back and relying on faith and trust and recognizing like our human finitude. And then I guess once you learn how to work through doubts, then we can continue to trust God maybe a little bit faster than the time before. But I'll say like one of the cool things about the Presbyterian Church, and a place where I still have doubts right now, is yes, I am called to ordained ministry, but in the Presbyterian Church, ordained ministry looks like a whole lot of different things. I spent all 3 years of seminary trying to figure out, do I become a pastor? Do I keep going on to school? How do I find a balance between my like real love for the local parish and my love of the academy? How do those fit together? Spent like the first 2 years thinking I was going to go straight through and try to apply for PhD programs. But in the summer of my second year and going into my third year, it was really like, no, I need to be with the people in the parish for a while. So like figuring out what the call manifests like is very different from like, am I called? And so like there are lots of doubts going like, am I doing the right thing right now? But the part where like I'm called to something, I don't have doubts in that, but what the something is, that you still got to wade through the water.
Thank you. Okay, well, Alexander, do you have any thoughts, or should we move on to the next? All right, we'll move on to the next question. All right, so this is a question, like, so because I'm not an ordained minister, right? This is something that I have just trouble with describing to people when they ask me, "What do you do for a living?" And so my call is, my question is, do you tell people on airplanes that you are a pastor?
Absolutely not.
Okay. I want to know why, and I'm interested in how that conversation kind of goes.
I make them work for it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I don't lead there. I never lie. I like my great hesitancy, and this kind of relates to question number one, is again, like I don't have any doubts about Christ or God or the church. But I feel like there's been, when you say pastor, that conjures up so many different images to so many different people that the amount of disclaimers that I want to put on that of what kind of pastor I am, it's just like too much. Because yeah, there's so like so many theologies out there and so many types of pastors I just like want to be, I have no desire to be associated with. So yeah, I tend to not try and spell that all out with strangers unless we're like really committed to the experience.
And so Nate, are you like, how many layers of how many layers of disclaimers are there when you finally get to like, yeah, I'm a pastor, depending on how you felt the person out? I'm just wondering how that kind of goes.
Well, okay, so before being at First Pres, I was a chaplain in a prep school for 3 years. And so people would be like, so what do you do? And I'd be like, well, I work in a school. And then they'd be like, well, what do you teach? And I'm like, well, actually, I'm a chaplain and I teach a philosophy class. And they're like, well, is that kind of like, what's that look like? And then you like spell it out more and more and more. Now, I try and get to the Presbyterian minister language as quickly as possible because I think sometimes that still conjures up a certain like type of pastor. But I mean, like Caroline, my wife Caroline and I talk about this a lot. And like when she says she's a pastor, there's a set of assumptions that come with that right off the bat. Because as a female, it means that she belongs to a tradition that ordains women, which already comes with a certain set of assumptions. So before I want to like lay out, it's like, well, I like affirm the creeds, but I'm also open and affirming of the gay community and women's ordination, and like think that the environment is something that we need to seriously protect. And like, it's so messy that I've never found a way to do it gracefully. Okay.
Right. So like, I've thought about it differently. Like you get different reactions if you say like, I'm a pastor, I'm a priest, or I'm a spiritual leader. Don't say spiritual leader. If you say I've never said that, but I've seen how that goes in other places, and that's nothing you want. They'll make a Netflix special about you if you start saying stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like for me, Nate kind of led into this. Like I have to sort of feel out, might this person be a safe person to reveal that I am a female pastor, it's impossible, obviously, to look at someone and be like, are they going to flip out when I say I'm a pastor and I'm clearly a woman? So I guess I avoid it most of the time, but I wear a collar, like a clergy collar on Sundays. And so it's been kind of interesting, like if I'll stop by the grocery store or something and just seeing how people respond to that. Mostly it's like puzzled looks. And one time someone saluted me at the farmer's market, which was really different. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't really tell people on airplanes that I'm a pastor.
Yeah, they like think you're making some sort of like very artistic statement. You know, they're like, oh, wearing that to the farmer's market, that's bold. Yeah. All right, Keith, what are how does it go with you? Because I felt like, so just for a little background, the first time we did this, I interviewed Keith and asked all these questions, and it was way too long. And it also, the audio was washed. So Keith has already been asked these questions. But I felt like the first time you said like you would, but it's more like you have to be kind of dragged into it.
Yeah, so I definitely don't broadcast as a pastor. Because it seems like there are not that many Presbyterians running around. And so the chances of me meeting another Presbyterian in the airport are pretty slim, except for the one time when I did and ran into a guy who was a retired Presbyterian minister somewhere in the mountains of North Carolina. But, I don't broadcast it. It seems like whatever version of a pastor the people have experienced, which is probably different than what we are as Presbyterian pastors, that's what they think I am. And so they either want me to like solve all of their theodicy problems on an airplane or like in 5 minutes, or just want to argue about something that I probably like really don't care about. But so if you in the congregation know what my Jeep looks like with all the stickers, my backpack is not any different. And so like I have a big Presbyterian cross on my backpack, and like buttons that say things like Jesus was a low-wage worker, or like care for God's creation, all of this stuff. So like, you know where I land theologically by looking at my backpack. So like people like can tell there's something up, and if they recognize that the Presbyterian cross, I have talked to people, but it really just ends up like they want me to be a counselor for like a free counselor for them for 2 hours. And I would really just like to take a nap or read my book or drink the free Coca-Cola they get me and not have to do that. Cause yeah, I'm just trying to be a regular person getting to where I'm trying to get to. And like, if I'm traveling, I'm not working. But if I become a pastor for a random person on an airplane, I suddenly become working. And we just like to not do that.
Yeah, right. I feel like sometimes it depends on I've gotten a lot of, when I have talked about what I do for a living, and I say like, oh, I work in young adult ministry, and it's I'm not saying this is indicative of, not trying to create a profile here, but I'm saying my experience typically, if it's a middle age or a woman that is up in age, they will talk to me about their kids, and their kids, like how they used to come to church as a kid. And I've gotten cell phone numbers before. Like, can you call David and talk to him about this, because he hasn't been to church in years, and I think he seems to be doing well. And it's just like, yeah, we'll see. But I feel like that's a very typical thing too. And I know even when I first got to First Pres and I started to meet some of the folks in our congregation, it was like, and this was a great thing, right? It was like, hey, can you get in touch with my son or my daughter? They still live in Greensboro here, but they haven't been to church in a long time. And so those kinds of things. So I get that a lot too. I don't know if that's an experience you've had.
And I'll also add that I don't want people on the airplane to know that I'm a pastor. But if they find out and like they've got stuff going on, I can't help but like put on the pastor role and do it. And like, I don't want to do it, but I do. And like, I'll be a pastor for them for 2 hours and really wish that I wasn't, but like still try to help them as best as I can in that short amount of time, which is why I don't want people to find out, because then I'll just start working.
Like I've heard stories from other pastors who they have like a chiropractor or masseuse, and like they go and get a massage at like once every 6 months or something, and they have to switch masseuses because every time they go, it's like it becomes a pastoral kind of session, and they're like, hey, I'm trying to relax here. This is so I've heard stories like that too that always make me laugh. Did y'all have anything to add?
No, I guess the other weird thing is
don't say no if you have something to add, Nate.
Oh, yes,
On,
I have something to add.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about one of the funny things will be just the corny jokes that you get all the time of, like, I used to, at the school I'd work at, I coached lacrosse too, and so like the forecast would have storms in it. It's like, Reverend Sell, maybe you could put in a good word with the big man upstairs just to make sure we get our game in today. It's like, that's not really what I do here, Bob, but thanks.
Yeah, right. Right. You're like one of Pharaoh's magicians. It's like, voila. Make sure this thing lands okay, Pastor. Like if we experience turbulence, we're going to call you to the front. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to question 9. So I'm going to have Keith start on this one because his answer is so shocking and offensive that everything else will pale in comparison to his answer. So question 9 is there a book or a movie that everyone else likes that you really don't understand why. So it's like, I think about this in terms of like, I'm not a Napoleon Dynamite fan. And when I was in middle school, all of my friends were like, "Hey dude, give me some of your tots." And I was just like, I don't think that's funny. Like, I don't, and it just like, it just bugged me. So that's something I've never really gotten. But Keith's answer is shocking. So I'll let Keith go.
Yeah, so I agree with the Napoleon Dynamite thing. That's my number 2. I don't understand it. But my number 1, and apparently, like, people don't like when I say this, and I also have no idea why people don't like my opinion, because I just don't get it. I have no idea why anybody likes the movie Avatar. I don't know why it's a big deal. I watched it. It was like I was watching a boring video game, and I just couldn't wait for it to end. And I have no idea why people like it.
Never seen Avatar.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Me neither.
Oh no,
But-
you can't.
Keith's
Sorry, Matt.
Keith's anti-endorsement has piqued my interest again. So
So one of the big innovations was like this was the first time 3D movies in theaters became like a thing. Now they give me headaches, so I didn't watch the 3D version.
3D movies are just gimmicks.
but it's just like the visual art of this film is just so brilliant and great. And then it's an eco
No.
yeah, it's an eco activist kind of movie. You know what I mean? It's like,
who needs Avatar when you have Ferngully? I mean, come on. I go back to the late 80s for that, or early 90s, whenever that came out.
yeah, right. Some
Avatar.
Joni Mitchell songs. Okay, so watch Avatar, and then you'll understand why Keith is clearly wrong about this. Avatar is not the greatest movie of all time, but it's James Cameron, first of all, like Titanic, right? And it's good. It's just good, and people will be like, "Oh, I understand why this is popular." So, Keith, you're wrong about that. Okay, who's next?
I hate the movie American Beauty with Kevin Spacey. That came out when I was in, I think, high school.
Yeah.
And like, basically, it seemed to be like the movie that all my friends watched in high school that made them feel like they were watching a deep movie. But in my estimation, it's about like cheating on your wife, like shirking your responsibilities, and then filming like plastic bags flying around in the wind. And I just think it's stupid, and I really, really dislike that movie. It's like, yeah, it felt like a movie so contrived about being a movie about deep stuff without actually being anything of real substance to me. So
Yeah.
That's my most hated movie.
So I would never let my Christian eyes gaze upon that filthy film. I'm kidding.
Good.
I'm kidding. Yeah, I do. I think it's okay, but I do get a sense, right, where you're like, your friends would be like, your friends who are really into lit.
Yes.
You know, they'd be like, well, yeah, you obviously have never read Camus. And you're like, all right, like, I'm not. Like being in nothingness, man. Have you never read Sartre? It's like, no, I'm not going to go there.
Right.
This is a Kevin Spacey film.
We all know how that guy wound up anyhow. So I mean,
we're not going to go there.
We're not okay. Yep.
Yeah, it was like Kaiser Soze is here, like trying to convince me that he's some deep thinker. Okay, Alexandra, I'm really don't disappoint, because I'm really excited to hear how you're just going to break my heart and tell me that like you don't like Shawshank Redemption or something.
My take is so much worse than you think, because I'm not a movie person. I maybe watch 5 movies a year. Maybe. I just don't get it. I don't this is horrible. I'm losing friends all over the church. But I'm just being honest. I really I've tried a little bit. I was going to say Star Wars, but I feel like that would make me lose even more friends. But I just said it. So I did watch Moonlight a few weeks ago, and it was beautiful.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, all right. I don't know. Yeah, I just can't make myself sit in front of a screen for that long.
Can you? Wait, I thought you were like the Big Bachelor fan. What's going on here? Like, is this? So it's not the screen, Alexandra.
Okay, it's not the screen.
Can you pinpoint like why it's like? Does it feel like a waste of time, or is it like there's all?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that's it. I think I've lived for so long in a space where I'm like, it's unproductive to sit here for 2 hours and watch one storyline.
But The Bachelor is time well spent.
Okay. You know what, you're
awesome.
right, because The Bachelor is sometimes 2 hours long. I don't know what it is about TV, because I think it's sort of like, I know that TV is mostly a waste of my time, especially trash TV. And I watch some trash TV. The Bachelor is an example. But movies, it's sort of like, I'm supposed to be enjoying this. It's supposed to be maybe even edifying or beautiful, or I'm learning something about the world or a beautiful story. And if I don't come away feeling like I've gained that, then it's like, man, I didn't enjoy that, and it was kind of a waste of time.
Right. So
I don't know.
So it's almost like movies are for you like television, except like the space that it occupies and like the public conscious is so different. Like
I think that's part of it. Yeah.
Okay. And that might be why you're not a huge like live sports fit. Like you're just like, oh, sick. I watched a baseball game.
Yeah,
like
I don't know if that's why I don't like sports, but we don't have to get into that.
Okay.
I have to say something so that people still like me. I read a lot. I really like to read.
Yeah, right. But maybe like that feeds the other one, right? It's like, oh, I could be reading like I could be reading like Austen, and I'm sitting here watching, Shark Tank, or another, many of the famous movies. So, okay, moving on. But yeah, Moonlight is beautiful. I mean, Jenkins is that I put that one off for like 2 years after it came out, and then once the big thing happened at the Oscars, where it was like not supposed, like La La Land won but didn't win, and actually Moonlight won.
Yeah,
it was like, but that movie just wrecked me. Like, it's just like really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And beautiful. Okay. Does anybody have any more hot takes to add about things that to try to to try to actually make social distancing not just like a thing that happens to you after social distancing is over, with any of these takes? Anybody? All right, we'll move on. Okay, so we're gonna finish up. It's not gonna be quite as long as the last time we did this. So this is a question to think about specifically for the time now and also going forward. I'm really, really sick of like hearing about silver lining talks. Like, I don't know about y'all, but like, I understand that there are good things that happen during really traumatic times, but I don't know if we have to be like, these are just good things happening. This thing is not the cause of this other thing. And so in that kind of spirit, what is your ongoing prayer for our congregation? Not for the world, like not for the community of Greensboro, but specifically like for our congregation during this time. I know that's when you make it that specific, it becomes almost more difficult to kind of pinpoint it. But yeah, Keith, I just saw you unmuted, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go. So my prayer for the congregation is that we're already in a weird time for the congregation with the interim stuff, and interim periods don't come around much at First Pres. And now this is a whole different thing. So my prayer is that we will move into the next chapter of the congregation's life gracefully, and whatever that new chapter is, that we will be nothing but Christian in it. We identify sometimes as a purple church, And I know we've talked about that somewhere. I don't really like the purple church connotation, because that means like we're Republicans and Democrats who happen to have a church together. And I would really love for the identity of the church to just be, we are a Christian church and we do what is Christian, completely throwing partisan politics out the window, rather than saying like, this is where Republicans and Democrats come together, saying, no, this is where Christians meet, and being nothing but Christian. And the way that church looks in the next decade or so is going to be very different from the decades that are closing. The next chapter is going to look very different from Sid Batz's chapter under his leadership. And Sid did a lot of great things, but we don't need to hold on to all of the things and like act like we're in 2010. But I really hope we move forward, and that we're okay with moving forward, and that we don't try to hold on to stuff that may not work, and that we're willing to try new things. Now, that doesn't mean that I want to get rid of tradition or anything. We need to hold on to traditions too. But I guess it's a prayer for like flexibility, and taking what are the traditions, what are the great things we've been doing, and what are they going to look like in the next chapter? And they may not look the same, but we can take the spirit of those good things and move on with them.
Thanks, Keith. Who's next?
I really like what Keith said, and agree. I think one of the, this is sort of a more specific thing, but one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot is just a prayer that our congregation would continue to learn how to be plugged into the community, and would be aware of what's happening in the neighborhood and in downtown, and also in the wider Greensboro community. Just where is their pain and where is their joy? And a lot of those spaces are spaces that we wouldn't occupy naturally on our day-to-day lives unless we're really paying attention. So I think just sort of an attunement to where the winds of the Spirit are moving outside of our own spheres of influence, and within them as well. I think we've done a really good job with that historically, this congregation has, but I think also just continuing to be aware of what's happening at Faith Action, and what's happening even those places across the street. What's the work of the Spirit doing in communities that might not look exactly like ours? So that's my prayer for this time and going forward.
Nate?
I think I would echo, a lot of what Keith and Alexandra just said. The silver lining of this time. I do think there's something to be said of when you take a pause from your normal routine, it gives you an opportunity to think about what you're going to be in the future. And everything Keith and Alexandra just said really resonates with me too, about, my prayer would be faithfulness over perceived effectiveness for our congregation in a variety of different things. So, asking what can we do for the church and for the world, rather than what can the church do for us. And I think a lot of our congregation is really good at that right now. And I hope that continues and grows. And just dreaming about, what kind of church are we going to be in this next chapter when we do get to come back together? Who are we going to be? What are we going to look like in Greensboro? What will be the hallmarks of, when we say First Presbyterian Church, what will somebody who doesn't belong there think about our church when they say that? My prayer is that we take the time right now to really dream who God is calling us to be. So basically what Keith and Alexandra said.
Okay, so this wasn't, thank you all for that. This wasn't on the script, but I'm going to ask you a question. Do you have any, I'll start, and this is something that I recommended to y'all last week, but a book or a movie or a show, whether it's for entertainment value, passing the time, or whether it's something that has really captured your imagination during this time of social distancing. Is there anything that you would recommend, or whether that you think that the not all of the congregation, but segments of the congregation would enjoy? And I'll start. So I read this book by Gillian Rose called Love's Work, which is just beautiful. I mean, it was just like brought you to your knees, because it's not a superficial understanding of love as sentimentality. It's really like her trying to understand the way love works through memory to allow her to like reflect on her life. So it's the argument is that, like, if we believe that there is a stream of love that runs through our connections, then in some ways the things that we remember, the good and the bad, have elements of love within them. And so trying to understand Love's work as framing her life. So this is a person who, you know, died very young. And she wrote this as she got really tough news about her condition, and so she's writing this knowing that she's going to die, and reflecting on the experience of the kind of things that have happened in her life that have shaped her, good and bad. And so it's short. It's only 130 pages, and it reads really quick. And it's provocative in some places. It's weird in some places, but it's her kind of dealing with her Jewishness and her understanding of philosophy and her understanding of what it means to be a woman, right? So she has some real qualms with feminism, but then like sort of has a more just a different sort of take on how that's related to her life specifically. And so it's I would recommend that to our congregation, specifically those who are looking for something that is it is a little more like, I don't want to be a jerk here, but it's just a little more like high-minded. It's sophisticated. Like, she's a philosophy professor in Poland. So it's written as one would who has that job and is going through a really traumatic experience, but reflecting on her life. It's kind of written from that gaze. So I think that's what I'd recommend. It's really quick. It's really short. You can find the PDF online. It's called Love's Work by Gillian Rose, and I've thought about that book more than almost anything else during this time as it relates to our current experience. So, all right, what do y'all got? What do you have? Recommendations.
On Being, the Krista Tippett podcast, which Matt and I have joked about before, but they just rebroadcast this week one of my favorite interviews, which is Ellen Davis out of Duke, who's a biblical scholar focusing on land. And that's coupled with my favorite author, Wendell Berry's poetry, with him reading poetry, which you don't get to hear that often. And I think it's just like, one, it's beautiful. Two, I think it's the greatest problem of our era is our treatment of the natural world, which bleeds into all sorts of other sorts of injustices and inequities. And I think it's timely right now, especially in a pandemic, to think about where our food comes from and how reliable those sources are and how we treat the earth. But that sounds really heavy, but it's actually a really beautiful, quick listen. So if you're out for a walk or doing dishes or whatever, it's a good podcast to listen to.
My answer is a parallel to Nate's. So along with like the theology of food and the land, that like gets you then into, I would recommend Michael Pollan's books and documentaries. Like, I really loved Cooked. And then the Cooked documentary got me into Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, which is a great documentary. And I actually got the book a couple of weeks ago, and I've been doing a lot of cooking. And like, it's not like a recipe book where like you follow the steps and then you have a beautiful meal, but it's like a really accessible documentary and accessible book on how does cooking work, how does food work, and then like you can make stuff. Like, if you know, like I have these things, I can make this, and I don't really need a recipe to figure out what's going on or to make it look like I can make actual food like out of my imagination. And that gets you like into like the theological things of like what's happening with food, what does it mean that I'm eating this? And then like it's also a practical thing of like cooking is really great at passing the time right now. I've been cooking better food than I have in a long, long time. Actually, probably making better food right now than I ever have because I've got time and I'm learning about how that stuff works. And then also, as a side to that, it's called the Tartine Bread Book, which teaches you how to do sourdough bread. And I think the whole world is learning how to do sourdough right now. That's probably the best resource on it. And bread making and cooking have been like fantastic things, and learning like I don't have to go out to get good food. I can make good food out of really basic things for much less than I would ever spend on takeout.
There's an author named Priya Parker who wrote a book. I think it came out pretty recently. I read it a couple months ago. Sorry, it's loud. Called The Art of Gathering. And she has a podcast right now through the New York Times, and it's called Together Apart. And she's talking about, so she's sort of a gathering guru. She writes all about how we create meaningful gatherings. And this could be anything from a baby shower to a wedding to a dinner party. And it's really compelling, has made me think a lot about church meetings, for better or for worse, and sort of how we construct meaning, ritualizing our gatherings and structuring them and things like that. And this podcast is all about gathering in a time when we can't physically gather. So it's there are only 3 episodes out right now. They're under a half hour and they're really, really good. The most recent one, she talks about like a virtual baby shower and how a friend might structure that for a woman who's about to have a baby. And it's helped me think about my little brother's turning 20 tomorrow, actually. And we're going to have a little Zoom birthday party for him because I can't go home. And, you know, it helped me think about everyone who's a part of it is going to send me a song that reminds us of Grady, and I'll make a playlist out of it, and that'll be a gift to him. And we'll each explain like why we picked that song. So it's helped me a lot to think about in this time where I am not thrilled that we can't be together in body. I like really, it helps me not be so irritated about it and like think about meaning making even in the midst of a time when we're all stuck at home. So that's an easy and interesting listen.
Thank you for that, and thank you all for doing this again. We'll try to keep doing these until we run out of questions to ask. Hopefully, we're back together in body soon. We can gather together some of those lessons we might learn from the podcast. And happy birthday to Grady as well, turning 20. 20 is a big deal because you know what next year is. You know what I mean? It's I'm kidding, of course. The other things that I wanted to mention really quick, this might be, I don't know when this is going to be released, but if it's released before Cinco de Mayo, we are having an Alleluia Zoom gathering on Cinco de Mayo to talk about the cross and the lynching tree, and specifically how the works of Nate's laughing.
Nothing says Cinco de Mayo like the cross and the lynching tree.
No. It just happened to be the first Tuesday. It just happened to be the first Tuesday of May, and so. Hey,
can I make more joke?
No. You can't. So we invite y'all. So essentially, what we're going to do, and I'm going to be serious now and make Nate feel bad. Is we're going to be thinking and talking about how kind of Cone's work and the work of racial justice and specifically Christian justice is responsive in a time where even the global pandemic doesn't choose who the carriers are. It does seem to be affecting minority populations, specifically in the United States, much more heavily than other populations. So, I mean, I'll just be blunt. If the poorer you are and the non-white the more non-white you are, the more likely you are to die from coronavirus in the United States. And so we're going to talk about that specifically relating to how Cone understands theology of suffering and the cross and the lynching tree. So everybody is invited to that. It's one of the things that's sponsored through the race task force. And so Keith and I have been posting little dialogues about that online. So check those out. And also Nate preached an awesome Vesper service last night. So if you haven't checked that out, please. I mean, this might come out in 10 days, so I'm not sure. That might be somebody else is going to preach next week. So just everything that that we've typically done, we are still doing at the church, just in kind of a different way. So please go to the website, and if you check out Digital Formation, you can find all those things. And I hope everybody's staying safe. I hope everyone's well, and we're praying for you, and we care about you, and we love you, and we just want to be back together with you soon. So thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Matt.